Let's explore how long it could take to receive meditation results. This evening's lesson is drawn from a good-hearted question found on Reddit, which begins, what is the minimal amount of time to get the benefits of meditation? Like more control over your emotions and better focus. They continued, for context, I am a student who has issues with focus as well as with my emotions. Right now, with anger. So let us begin with broad brushstrokes. So whether you are a student in elementary, junior high, high school, college, or grad school, if you have if your problem with focus is either acute or chronic, if it's long-term problem with focus, it may be a physiological challenge. There are physicians who specialize in that, and they can do assessments to see if you have some sort of a neurological challenge. I always recommend starting with medicine, because the last thing we want to do is rely on Iron Age remedies when we're living, in the digital age, the silicon age. So while you're waiting to meet with your doctor, there are things I can help you with. For a lot of people, approximately, I think 10 to 15, I think anywhere from 8 to 15% of the general population qualifies having a form or an iteration of ADHD. And so, speaking as someone with both ADHD and autism, because I'm just fancy that way, for me, focus is about fatigue and dopamine. If I have an excess of fatigue, focus goes away. If I have a deficiency of dopamine, focus goes away. And so for myself, I have to use a lot of, lifestyle strategies. And you've heard them all before. Getting enough sleep, fresh air, exercise, sunshine, eating a whole food diet. Personally, I'm a big fan of the whole food vegan diet. And of course, there are wonderful free resources in the description area below the video. These things really help. However, there are still 1,000 different variables in our lives. And so we have to notice when we feel our focus wane. It's time to notice, because that is a metaphoric, that could be one of your body's metaphoric cries for help. Hey, I need water. Hey, I need a snack. Hey, I need to lie down and watch kitty cat videos. Hey, I need to do something athletic, I need to knock up some calisthenics to get my dopamine up. Something. So I know that's terribly, terribly imprecise. But having done my due diligence of recommending medicine, medical care, and recommending lifestyle therapies, now I can narrow my focus to my area of expertise, which is meditation. So what I'm going to do is start with a bit of bad news. Sturgeon's Law reminds us that 90% of everything sucks, but not in the fun, tingly way. Well, then in what way? Well, the majority of people, including meditation teachers, think it's a wonderful idea to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. Now, these people typically give terrible meditation advice. Most of them don't mean to, but they do. And we'll explore the neuroscience behind that in a few minutes. However, there's still 10% who have a real clue. And these 10% are on the path of being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind. Now, can people get short-term results from being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling? Yes. But that's all they get. They don't get long-term fulfillment, just short-term superficial results. So for instance, whether you're in elementary school, junior high, high school, college, or grad school, you're probably going to school because you want an awesome life. So just tying yourself up in knots, forcing yourself to produce an analog of concentration is going to produce some terrible, terrible dividends. So what you want to do is find a way to do your schoolwork that is sustainable, that is good for your heart and your mind, your heart metaphorically, your mind, your emotions, your body, and your relationships. Because, gotta tell you, if you choose the path of being rigid, fearful, superstitious, and controlling, you're going to be a cranky bastard. It's going to take a toll on your emotions, on your mind, on your relationships, on your health, on everything. You don't want that. You really don't want that. I know I've experimented with that. I pushed myself so hard to the point of collapse when I was in high school. That's common for people with neurodivergence, from just masking, from trying to basically pretend, cosplaying as a human, when we're actually more like aliens, for God's sakes. That's not uncommon, what I experienced. But I wouldn't wish it on anybody, even to a lesser degree. So, for those who traverse the Buddha's path of being flexible, loving, rational, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, and kind, what is the timetable? In the penultimate passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, we read that we can master the Buddha's path in less than 7 years, or 7 quarters, or 7 months, or 7 fortnights, or 7 weeks, or even 7 days. Your first week, you can practice for as little as 5 minutes every 12 hours or so, which is pretty easy to fit into one's schedule. The question is, how will you practice? And I feel that we eliminate much more confusion if we view the topic of mindfulness and meditation through the metaphoric lens of neuroscience. Let's start with the 90% who are buttheads. Those who are on the path of being rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel will 9 times out of 10 implore you to practice active concentration and active analysis by relying, and the only way to do that, the only way to perform those intellectual chores, is to rely upon very discrete structures, such as those found in our medial prefrontal cortex or our dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, any athletic coach will tell you that just as you must train hard, you must rest hard. And if you don't get enough rest and proper nutrition, first you will experience the law of diminishing returns, and then you will experience injury and possibly disability. How does that relate to the brain? Simply this. If we overuse our wonderful prefrontal cortex, I say it's wonderful because it helps us compare, contrast, sort, calculate, reason, edit. It's a workhorse. It's wonderful. But if we overwork it, our amygdala activates, which is the source of aggression and anxiety, and tends to feed and intensify our already pre-existing tendencies to be rigid, fearful, superstitious, controlling, elitist, cryptic, competitive, and cruel. And nobody wants that. But if you're as dumb as I used to be, I was so good at ignoring my body's cries for help in the name of bro science, in the name of just gutting it through. I would push myself even beyond that. And when people do that, they can so exhaust their prefrontal cortex that they begin presenting with symptoms of depression. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. So how's about some good news? Here's our first spoonful of good news. And it begins with mindfulness. Every time we inhale, whether we know it or not, whether we mean to or not, whether we feel it or not, we are wired by evolution to effortlessly and automatically access our sympathetic nervous system, which is found in the middle third of our spinal cord. This bad boy has evolved to help us to perceive in a very specific way, to help us perceive vulnerably, passively, viscerally, randomly, and fleetingly. Can you see how this is more yin than it is yang? How it is more flexible than it is rigid? Can you see that? There's a physiological basis for the path of yin, for the path of the Buddha, which is very cool. Which means Lao Tzu or Gautama need not be literal. They could be archetypical, and this neuroscience would still be just as sound. But into each life some rain must fall, and I've got something negative to share with you. That noticing things can be overwhelming and sometimes unpleasant. Oh, sure, yeah, we can notice sights, sounds, sensations, flavors, scents, and the like, but we could also notice emotions, intentions, thoughts, memories, and imaginings. And that can be overwhelming, but I've got a second spoonful of good news for you. And it pertains to the subject of meditation. Because every time we exhale, whether we mean to or not, whether we intend to or not, we effortlessly and automatically access our parasympathetic nervous system. And it's located in both the lower third as well as the upper third of that same spinal cord, which is kind of wild. So this bad boy has evolved to help us both physically relax as well as mentally release. Well, what's so good about that? I'll tell you, and this is our third spoonful of good news. It can help to mellow out our anxious and aggressive amygdala. On top of that, it can activate this thing right here. This thing that kind of looks like a catcher's mitt. This thing that big kids call the anterior cingulate gyrus. And that functions as the hub of our mirror neurons, the seat of empathy and compassion and love. So our third spoonful of good news is that when we practice mindfulness and meditation in cooperation with our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, we begin to experience what the greatest Dzogchen lamas refer to as the highest love, the love that is spontaneous and uncontrived. I apologize. I'm prone to motor tics when I'm tired, and so I might start ticking tonight. I think that was my first one. Please do not take that personally. And I'd like to present with you now the fourth spoonful of good news. In Buddhism, there is a cryptic phrase which is translated into English as expedient means. Here's how it works. When our choices, utterances, and deeds flow with the effortless effort of love's centered spontaneity, we were able to navigate life from a place of truly being flexible, loving, laid back, egalitarian, lucid, cooperative, rational, and kind. And we're able to do that effortlessly by surfing the present moment. That's the key to every type of meaningful success. It might not be flashy. It might not follow the timetable we would like it to. But it is the key to the most sustainable, fulfilling phenomena in our life. You see, in our underbrain, we have not one but two reward systems. The dopamine-oriented reward system that responds with pleasure, and the oxytocin-oriented reward system that responds with fulfillment. The liberation the Buddha offers us is not liberation from the mere presence of our dopamine-oriented reward system, but its tyranny, and the tyranny of our survival instincts. Those survival instincts are useful, but they make much better tools than they do tyrants. The more overstimulated our amygdala is, the more we're going to live from our survival instincts. The more those survival instincts are going to be our boss. The more successfully we practice mindfulness and meditation, the less these survival mechanisms will rule over us, and they'll move from the role in our life of being a tyrant to the role of just being tools. Now, if you're half as clever as I hope you are, you'll say, hey, Lama Jigme, just because I have a sympathetic nervous system, just because I have a parasympathetic nervous system, doesn't mean I have peace, doesn't mean I have love. I could be anxious and cranky half the time, maybe more. What's up with that? In a word, Urkel. Our brain is a lot like Urkel. It's clever, it's sweet, at least has the potential to be sweet, but it's overwhelmed. It's basically a three-ring shit show due to a quirk of evolution. But there is something very cool that we humans can do. We can as we silently, mentally, and passively recite the demonstrative pronoun this during our inhalation, we can observe the three-ring shit show of our brain spontaneously cooperating with our sympathetic nervous system. Similarly, as we silently, mentally, and passively recite the one-syllable verb ease during our exhalation, We can notice the same clown car of absurdity that we call a brain spontaneously cooperating with our parasympathetic nervous system. It way back in the 80s, in the early days of personal home computers, our computers were worthless. We might buy a computer, but it didn't. All it had was an operating system. It didn't have any software on it. We had to buy that separately. And then we had to buy documentation, great big thick books of how to operate those word processors because they really were not user friendly. But once we loaded the appropriate software, that transformed our personal computers from very expensive paperweights to stuff that actually worked. Similarly, these monosyllabic words act as our software that helps to awaken or reawaken the latent cooperation possible between our big old brains and our sympathetic nervous system, as well as our parasympathetic nervous system, which I think is just wild. Is it going to turn you into Jarvis overnight? No. Is it going to give you an eidetic memory overnight? No. Will it make your life much more tolerable? Yes. So let's touch on one last thing. And I'm addressing the person who wrote the question. You mentioned anger is becoming a great issue. When you feel really like you have a full head of steam, here's a useful trick. Brisk walking meditation. As you walk briskly around your block, swinging your arms, swinging your legs, replace the word this with perceiving. Replace the word ease with releasing. Silently and mentally recite perceiving as you inhale. Silently and mentally recite releasing as you exhale. As you walk around the block, do so for 20 or 40 or 60 minutes, and you will feel better. It necessarily will not push the annoying stimuli out of your life, although that would be pretty cool if it did, but will help you to deal with it and to cope with it, whether that annoying stimuli is in the here and now or in the past, or it's just something that's been cooked up by your imagination. Whatever it is, it can help. This mechanism can help you. And if you don't like me, that's fine. There's a wonderful book you can get by a PhD, Dr. Tom Hartman, PhD. You can find it on Amazon. The title is Walking Your Blues Away. And for a nominal fee, he'll basically tell you what I just told you. That walking briskly while being vulnerable to that which is making you feel really intense emotions can help you to process them. He'll explain it in terms of PTSD and CPTSD, and that's a cool tool. But for now, I've probably given you more than enough information. What I'd like to do now is, together as a team, practice together. So let's do that after approximately 30 seconds of housekeeping. This is Lama Jigme Gyatso of the Buddha Joy Meditation School. For more than 30 years, I spent about 8 hours a day, almost every day, studying, practicing, mastering, and reverse engineering each school of meditation so that you won't have to. Welcome to Meditate Like a Jedi, which is made possible due to the generosity of viewers just like you. Once again, I apologize if I have a boo-boo face tonight.